has abundant human and natural resources to leapfrog towards a low-carbon economy while opening new opportunities for climate finance, trade, investment, innovation, resilience, and green jobs. Excellencies, honorable colleagues, the climate change debate has entered a new era. It is no longer just about tackling an environmental or development problem, but about addressing climate change in the context of justice. We must look at African countries and their high debt distress, contextualizing it with our ability to adapt and mitigate climate change. We must look at the impact of climate change to our economies, which are heavily dependent on climate-sensitive sectors such as agriculture, tourism, fisheries, energy, and forestry, among others. We must also be cognizant of the climate change nexus with migration and the need to climate-proof our infrastructure. That is why we are persuaded that if we do not develop adequate response measures to deal with the climate change crisis, it will crush us all together. Let us therefore step up and lead the world to find solutions for climate change by listening to all voices at this climate summit, including from youth, indigenous communities, and civil society from Africa and beyond. As I conclude, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to convey goodwill and urge you all to take time during your visit and sample our rich wildlife and cultural heritage. Her Excellency, Ambassador Sacco, and myself wish at this early stage to extend an invitation, since this is a ministerial, we are beginning today, to invite you all later on to dinner this evening and more deliberations so that we can firm up the outcomes that we want to see coming out of this summit. Thank you very much, and I will now take this opportunity to usher in our youth representative, Ms. Elizabeth Wathuti, who has been, for the last 3 days, have led a group of young people from across the continent to put together very solid resolutions, ideas, and very visionary indeed group of young people who are joining in the discussion and want to be part of the action. They say they no longer want to be bystanders. They want to be right on the table. Welcome, Elizabeth, and your team.
Thank you so much. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, invited guests, I stand on the observed protocol. After months of regional and national consultations, mobilization that accumulated into uniting youth from every nook and cranny of the continent here for the last 3 days to exchange and voice our concerns, we stand today, Saad Ukas from the Kingdom of Morocco, Dion Shukuza from the Republic of Namibia, and I, Elizabeth Wathuti, from the host country of Kenya, the land of beautiful landscapes and the greatest marathoners, as representatives of the African Youth Climate Assembly, to underscore the urgency of addressing climate change and its profound impact on Africa's youth. Our declaration, the African Youth Climate Declaration, reflects our commitment to harness the power of our youth to drive meaningful change. The African Youth Climate Assembly's vision is rooted in inclusivity, resilience, innovation, and the conviction that young people are one of the biggest resources that Africa is endowed with. We seek to elevate youth participation and inclusion in climate governance, forging pathways towards sustainable development and green growth. And we urge you, our esteemed leaders, to join hands with us in this endeavor. And we have our key asks from the Youth Declaration that I will invite my good friends from the Kingdom of Morocco and Namibia to present.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I stand on all observed protocol. The first demand that the Youth Climate Assembly came up with reads as follows. We oblige upon the key stakeholders to recognize, promote, and invest in the decision of the African Youth Climate Assembly to establish the Assembly as the principal forum for consolidating, meaningfully enhancing the coordination of youth engagement in the climate governance across member states beyond the Africa Climate Summit, and also further urge the key stakeholders to support youth inclusion in advancing Africa's sustainable development goals and the green growth agenda in continental forums. Further, engage the African Union Commission's Youth Division and Department of Sustainable Environment and Blue Economy to integrate the African Youth Climate Assembly into their structures, aligning, most importantly, with Article 19 of the African Youth Charter on Sustainable Development and Protection of the Environment. We further oblige upon parties to create an international or intergenerational green investment fund to generate green jobs for African youth. We would like to stress on this point that this was one of the most highlighted points from the consultations and also the engagements, financing youth action for climate. Further, lobby for the established United Nations Youth Office to be domiciled in Africa in line with structuring a global multilateral climate institution. We further also applaud on creating adaptation jobs for young people and equipping them with entrepreneurial skills for solutions and thus fostering resilient livelihoods. Further, engage Africa's youth as advocates for increased access to renewable energy. Engage youth in exploring Africa's agricultural potential, in particular to meet the food security challenges of the continent. And lastly, to invest in youth-led research and innovation for identifying local climate solutions. And with those few demands, I would give my brother Saad Ukas a chance to give us a closing statement. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, in conclusion, our vision encompasses green investments, renewable energy, adaptation initiatives, and youth-led innovation. Your children are watching you today. We have to trust you, and you have to trust us. We call upon you leaders to enable us and stand with us in this crucial mission. Climate justice and sustainability are within our reach, and if not, one day we will be here at your place and with our countries burning and drowning, and you will not be there to save us. If we want to go far, we have to go together, join our hands to save our continent. Ubuntu.
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Africa is a truly diverse and multi-ethnic continent. The indigenous peoples of Africa are often on the front line of the effects of climate change. To discuss with us today the indigenous people's perspective on climate change, please put your hands together to welcome Ms. Anne Samante.
Bana ba Kenya namugezendi mulembe lundi waya mumbe kama rumwelezera ko bulayi kwa kubanenda kama dunda ko buru mu Kenya.
His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Arap Ruto, and all other excellencies, distinguished guests, Madam CS, Honorable Soipan Tuya, all protocols observed. Good morning. My name is Samantha Ann. I'm here to read a statement on behalf of indigenous peoples of Africa. We, the African indigenous peoples from 20 countries, gathered in the pre-summit held in Nairobi in the past 2 days in preparation for this summit today, appreciate the Africa Climate Summit Secretariat and the government of Kenya, as led by our able president, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, for the continued recognition of indigenous peoples and traditional knowledge as a contribution to African climate change discourses. The role that African indigenous peoples play in protecting critical ecosystems across the continent makes them major actors in combating climate change. Furthermore, given that our livelihoods are based on direct use of natural resources, indigenous peoples are unfortunately the most hit hardest by climate crisis, notwithstanding the fact that we have the lowest carbon footprint, or rather the lowest emitters. As the African Climate Summit commences today, our main concerns and requests are as follows. One, on clean and renewable energy and energy transition. As we are all aware, all renewable energy initiatives are all around indigenous peoples' territories. For us, there is no idle land. For us, the so-called idle land is our fathers' grazing land. This is our area of our cultural, where we undertake our cultural rights. And so to us, any investment around renewable energy must take into consideration free, prior, and informed consent. Moreover, renewable energy investment should ensure to ease mobility of indigenous peoples, because through mobility, by ensuring mobility, then it means you've helped us to be more resilient, and the vice versa is true. On adaptation and resilience to climate risk, we are not only victims, but we also come with solutions. Our traditional knowledge and ways of life enable us to build resilience and adaptation to the impacts of climate change. Furthermore, considering that there are an estimated 50 million indigenous peoples living in 5 regions of African countries, whose participation and contribution through indigenous peoples' knowledge and knowledge system provides tremendous solution to the climate change crisis. However, as much as we contribute this much to climate resilience and adaptation, our knowledge and traditional adaptation resilience are not mainstreamed in local and regional policy and legislation frameworks. Therefore, we request this summit to recognize the contribution of indigenous peoples' traditional knowledge, which make them more resilient to climate change. On climate finance for adaptation and resilience, despite the fact that we do play a critical role in protecting the ecosystem that our lives entirely depends on, a recent study has shown that indigenous peoples receive less than 1% of all climate financing globally. Indigenous peoples of Africa continue to be obstructed from direct access to finance due to lack of recognition of our unique identity. Lack of clear policy, legal framework, and complex requirements continue to limit our direct access to climate financing, yet, as I said earlier, we are the most hit by the crisis of climate change. We therefore request for establishment of an Indigenous Peoples Climate Resilience Fund to mitigate against the impacts of climate change. On effective participation, and as climate change discourse continues to gain traction, the Indigenous peoples, despite being the most vulnerable group, has continued to face systemic exclusion from decision-making, and also have negatively impacted by the climate intervention, negatively impacted by the climate intervention and response measures, some of which are detrimental to the existence of Indigenous people. During this summit and beyond, we request for effective and meaningful participation of African Indigenous peoples, including creation of an African Union focal point at the AU headquarters to have an Indigenous person focal point who will be handling our matters at the AU. In conclusion, we reiterate again that although Indigenous peoples contribute the less to carbon emissions that lead to climate change challenges, we continue to suffer the most. We are therefore here with solutions and experiential lessons from Mama Africa. We look forward to have our concerns, priority, and contribution captured in the summit's outcome document, which is the Nairobi Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the summit is steeped in democracy, and with good reason, because the climate crisis affects everybody. The last 3 days, we have had very robust engagements during the 11th Climate Change and Development in Africa Conference, held between the 1st to the 3rd of September, just ended yesterday. And this is a forum convened by the AU, UNECA, the Africa Development Bank, as well as the Kenyan government and the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, and to bring to us the voice and sentiments from the civil society is our next speaker, Dr. Mithika Mwenda. Let's put our hands together for Mithika.
Thank you, CS. Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, the Deputy President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to stand by existing protocols. It is with great honor that I address you today, first, as the Executive Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, representing the African civil society, and secondly, wearing the hat of the larger non-state actors steering committee for the African Climate Summit, which has been meeting since the announcement by Kenya of hosting this all-important summit in February this year. As we gather here in Nairobi for this inaugural Africa Climate Summit, I can't help but feel the weight of the challenges and the opportunities that lie ahead. For many years, the climate change negotiations under the UNFCCC have remained a contestation between North and South, with deepening mistrust and widening divide between North and South about two actions that should reverse the impacts of the challenge that poses existential threat to the survival of humanity and the planet, that is adaptation and mitigation. The outcome of this summit, then, should seek to not only provide a neutral ground for conversation and restore hope and dignity for millions of people whose livelihoods have been turned upside down due to the ranging climate impacts manifested by shifting seasons, drying rivers, erratic rainfall, diseases, compounding food crisis, and forced solutions, but should also be responsive to African people's realities, aspirations, desires, and imperatives of climate justice. Top of these should be adaptation, underpinned by the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. It is not just about coping with the impacts of climate change, but also about enhancing our solidarity in prosperity, resilience, reducing our risk, and seizing the opportunities which are coming with this challenge. Yes, Africa, with the most progressive position in international dialogue on climate change, has pronounced itself on what we require in adaptation and mitigation. And the all standards show that we are doing more than our fair share in the global efforts to combat this crisis. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa needs between 160 to 340 billion US dollars by 2030 for adaptation, while the current flows are only around 16 billion annually, a fraction of a budget for a blue chip company and foundations attending this summit. We need a deep conversation on how to address this, including achieving the balanced financing between adaptation and mitigation, as delaying action now will result in exponential costs in the future. This summit should also convey a bold, unequivocal message from Africa that it is not a forum to end the industrialized countries, to escape their historical responsibilities, and to transfer their burden of action to the victims of their actions, but a platform to once again renew our call to honor their commitments on deep and genuine emission reduction, adequate support to vulnerable, and support the communities at the front line of climate crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, we want to extend a hand of partnership and take front seat in the inevitable transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient, fair, equitable, and ecologically just development pathways. We should also seek to change the narratives, and I think I have heard His Excellency President speaking about that every time. And we need also reciprocal actions from our partners in the North and urge them not to shift the goalpost like they have done before. I hope, Your Excellency, you will agree with me that we are doing so much, but there is a problem. We have the critical natural resources, for instance, including vast mineral resources, cobalt, lithium, and all others, which will drive this transition. How to exploit these resources, then, should be the conversation we should have. How we leverage them will determine whether we repeat the curse of the minerals driving the carbon-addicted industrial revolution, that is through fossil fuels, which has brought us the current challenges we have. Or we will choose to start with an opportunity to shape our future through a resilient, prosperous, inclusive, and fair way. This is really our time. And thank you again, Your Excellency. When we were in South Africa during the African Parliamentarian Summit on Climate Policy and Equity, I told you, you are our general. And I told you, now below there, you are our soldier. Let us work together, and we promise our commitment to that process. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Mithika, for speaking on behalf of the civil society. Now, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we move on, noting that the vital agenda pursued this week, the ACS will play a crucial part in the global fight against climate change and have a massive impact in the upcoming global initiatives around climate action. And one of these is the COP28. And Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are aware that during this summit, we have the African Climate Week convened by the UNFCCC as part of the regional climate weeks, again, that build momentum for COP28. And we have here with us none other than the Executive Director of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Simon Stiell. Let us put our hands together to have the statements from Simon. Welcome, Simon.
Monica, 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 Monica,
Excellencies, ministers, colleagues, friends, I'm honored to be here at the Africa Climate Summit and the first of 4 regional climate weeks of 2023. I want to thank the Kenyan government and personally President Ruto for his leadership and vision in bringing us here together. And I want special recognition for Minister Soipan Tuya for her work and efforts in helping to organize both the summit and the climate weeks. This summit for Africa, by Africa, will help us tackle the climate crisis we see and feel all around the world. I speak to you today not just as the head of the UNFCCC, but as the former minister from a developing country. So let us talk about what we can do to stabilize the climate and build resilient societies in Africa and throughout the world. Development is, as it should be, a priority. I know personally the destruction that climate-related disasters can wreak on years of development. But the world is asking for a lot. Develop, but don't do it in the carbon-intensive way that we did in the past. Therefore, it is a global responsibility to collectively work out how we do that. Every day this week, we'll be putting our heads together to discuss how to build resilience to climate risks, transition to a low-emission economy, and collaborate on solutions, transforming our economies through a just transition that benefits all sectors of society. Africa, the equal partner in this endeavor, is offering its huge potential. We already know innovation in Africa is astounding. So how can we accelerate this development through green technology and energy? And in doing so, taking the necessary actions to keep in 1.5 within reach. First, we must address finance. Climate action, just like everything else in life, costs money. Finance should be viewed in the context of mitigation and adaptation, in addition to all of the other things. COP28 will be a critical moment to hold the line on temperature rise at 1.5 degrees Celsius. The world needs to reduce emissions by 43% from 2019 levels by 2030 to achieve this. And the IPCC reports that impacts will be far greater at anything above this, especially in certain parts of the world. So for starters, to hold this off, we immediately need to see the delivery of the pledged $100 billion, a doubling of adaptation finance, the substantial replenishment of the Green Climate Fund, a global finance system, both public and finance, that is aligned with action and green finance. At COP27, I committed to ensure the Secretariat does all that it can to support parties to deliver on their commitments. I see our role as catching what you, parties, throw and shine light on how you can, together, throw it higher to get it in the basket. I also committed to maximizing the opportunities available to us to build collaboration throughout the year between COPs. This Africa Climate Week is a good example on delivering just that. In the past, we used to have only 3 to 4 mandated events associated with the regional climate weeks. Now there are 20. We've been working to cluster them, not just for efficient and resource saving's sake, but also because it is here, in the regions, where catalytic connections are made, and we can supercharge action on the ground. I want to see Africa Climate Week usher in climate action in 3 pivotal fronts. First, it must enable governments to amplify their contributions and commitments. Second, strengthen regional bonds and collaboration. And third, and perhaps most profoundly, empower local transformation so that African nations can come to COP28, which is less than 100 days away, in leading action and ambition. At COP28, the first global stocktake will review our progress on climate action. We know we are not on track. Our response to those findings is a key opportunity to course correct towards a sustainable future. In addition, we must respond to those impacts we know cannot be averted through our approach to loss and damage and the operationalization of the fund and funding arrangements at COP28. The discussions taking place here will inform the global stocktake about the challenges, barriers, and opportunities for climate action and support within the context of Africa. The UNFCCC Secretariat can work with you to identify the opportunities for Africa and facilitate the solutions and to attain those opportunities. Excellencies, ministers, the world is counting on your continued collaboration and leadership. I thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Next, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, is my turn to introduce Her Excellency Josepha Sako, who is the African Union Commissioner in charge of agriculture, rural development, blue economy, and sustainable development. Welcome, my sister. You have been extremely instrumental in helping us co-host this summit.
Thank you, Cabinet Minister, to give me the floor. Good morning, every one of you. Let me acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya and coordinator of the Committee of Head of States and Government on Climate Change of African Union. His Excellency Azali Assoumani, the President of the Union of Comoros and current African Union Chairperson. His Excellency Moussa Faki Mahamat, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission, the Excellencies Head of States and Government from Africa and abroad, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, if he's present, His Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, honorable ministers present, executive head of international organizations, representative of the civil organization, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. On behalf of the African Union Commission, I am pleased to welcome you all to the African Climate Summit and to thank all delegates from Africa and the world at large for setting time aside of your busy schedule to participate at this inaugural African Climate Summit. You're welcome. Karibu. Sejam bem-vindo. Vous êtes le bienvenu. Merci. Your participation is a clear demonstration of our unwavering commitment to collectively shape the future of climate change, climate action in Africa and across the world. We are not isolated. We are following the global agenda. Although we are not the polluters, our responsibility is just 4%, but we cannot isolate because the climate issue, it's really affecting all of us globally, the planet, and we need a sound planet for the next generation. That's why in the continent, we are fully committed in this agenda, and I really commend President Ruto for his commitment on this climate agenda. Congratulations, Excellency President. Let me also like to acknowledge the presence of former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, His Excellency Prime Minister of Ethiopia. You're welcome to this meeting. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to express our sincere gratitude to the government and people of Kenya for the warm reception and hospitality accorded to all the delegation since their arrival in this beautiful city of Nairobi. I would also like to commend the organizers from the different ministries and partners organizations under the leadership and strategic guidance of His Excellency Dr. William Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, that worked around the clock on the technical and logistical arrangement required for a successful summit. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to submit to you that climate change is a pandemic in Africa and is responsible for more lives and economic distress. Climate change is resulting in an increased frequency and intensity of extreme weather events that causes disasters with compounding effects because they do not allow us to recover before another disaster strikes again. What are we witnessing is the situation thereby governments are abandoning development and concentrating their resources in responding to climate-related disaster without building resilience. We know that many African governments, they are using at least 2% of their budget to invest on the disasters, on adaptation programs in the continent. In our continent. Research tells us that some of the African member states are spending up to 50% of their GDP per year in response to climate-induced disasters. The economic losses resulting from climate change stand at more than 5% of the annual GDP for the continent. The bottom line is that the cost of climate change in Africa is too high for us. We know for sure that crying for the promised resources by the developed countries' parties has not yielded tangible results, and even the $100 billion that you promised during the during the Paris Agreement, COP21, up to now, we haven't seen anything. We haven't seen anything. That was the pledge in 2009 to be accessible from 2022. We are in 2023. We haven't seen anything. Please, partners, come and honor your pledge. Has not been reached to Africa. This is despite being their obligation due to their historic responsibility for climate change in line with the Convention and the Paris Agreement. We also know that the cost of addressing climate change is also skyrocketing. For example, the revise of our NDCs for Africa will require an estimated $3 trillion of investment, US dollar investment, to implement, in addition to all the climate action, including NAPS. Africa has refused to wait and die due to climate change. We shall continue to pursue them to honor their obligation, but at the same time, we shall proceed with our own initiatives aimed at building resilience in Africa. I must confess that at the African Union Commission, we are enjoying support for some of our development partners, and so are some of the member states. However, Africa needs to move from a donor-recipient relationship to that built around investment, as that it is the pathway to reaping development aspiration of our continent, the Africa we all want. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the primary goal of this summit is to propel our collective efforts on climate change and sustainable development forward. The fundamental driver of success for African green transition will be the availability of resources for investment, and these must be accompanied by the strengthening of the ability of the African countries to mobilize their own resources, their own domestic resources. And I believe in Africa we can do it. We have the resources. Let us start allocating the resources on the environmental agenda when we are doing our national budget. I believe that we have this capacity. So the fundamental driver of this success, as I say, for African green transition will be the availability of resources for investment, and those must be accompanied by strengthening of the ability of the African country to mobilize our own resources, build on the foundation of solid and inclusive economic growth. As a continent, previous growth models have been predicated largely on the sheep production and export of African raw material with a minimal value addition. We have to start adding value and create jobs for our youth and our women. A continuation of this trajectory will undoubtedly reinforce Africa's vulnerability. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, the African continent remains a key player in charting the way forward towards a low-carbon future, despite being the least contributor and yet highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. However, our strength lies in our unity and the fact that we are a continent that is vibrant, fast-growing, useful, young population, energy, and diversity. Our solution for African climate change are rooted in large-scale investment in climate resilience centered on energy access to drive sustainable industrialization. This represents one of the fastest drivers for poverty reduction, while also fundamentally changing the nature of Africa's economic model with large-scale investment in a sustainable value chain. To this end, we continue to put policy framework in place to support the implementation of climate action. Such frameworks include the African Union Climate Change and Resilience Development Strategy and Action Plan. This was adopted by our head of state. We are not here to invent the wheel. The wheel exists. If you want to partner with us, this is what our head of state adopted, and I invite partners to really align any investment in Africa with this important strategic action on climate change. We didn't have it, but we support of some partners, even the EU, we were able to elaborate and approve it. So I call upon all the partners and our member states to align on this so that we are not trying to multiplicate or duplicate what already exists in the continent. The second strategy, it is the Continental Green Recovery Action Plan and the integrated strategy on meteorology. So these instruments are strategic and they exist. So if at all we want to tackle all the issues of the challenges of climate change, the tools are there. I'm just inviting investment. Let us find a mechanism where our member state can have access to these capitals, financing resources, so that we can go ahead. We have already done our homework with these tools that was approved. As I conclude, I would like to emphasize the following, that Africa's potential is fostering its sustainable development. Its great green transformation must be designed and led by African countries and African institutions, and should be centered on the mobilization of new and additional resources that can be deployed urgently. 2, that Africa's energy transition must be defined. My colleague is here. She's going to share with us how is she doing as a commissioner of this important department, which is the Department of Infrastructure. Honed and led by African for it to be just and equitable. 3, we need to structurally alter the relationship of African economy within the global economy and reduce the impact of exogenous shocks by building sustainable value chain. This will allow a focus on people and on ensuring the connection between the citizens of Africa and its immense natural health. In this process, we are determined not to be bystander in this, but to lead by doing. Nevertheless, as a continent, we will continue to hold our partners accountable to the promise they made to us. For together, we aim to elevate the discourse surrounding climate change and rely support for a financial architecture specifically tailored by Africa, while also emphasizing our continent's abundant resources and the resilience as we accelerate our transition towards a climate resilient future. Fifth, as this green transformation is built on this shared determination, I urge us to strongly embrace our collective strengths towards this cause. This summit will be just one step of many towards attaining our objective, which is our Agenda 2063. Six, and lastly, we will count on the support of partners present here today, as well all relevant stakeholders, to support the implementation of the summit's outcome. As the African Union Commission, we remain determined and committed to work with member states in addressing climate change, including the implementation of the outcome of this summit, which is the Nairobi Declaration. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention and look forward for a fruitful deliberation. Asante sana, muito obrigada, muitas gracias, merci beaucoup, shukran.
Good job, Your Excellency, with the Swahili. Your Excellency, colleague ministers, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the apex of the opening session of today's ministerial segment of the Africa Climate Summit. And Excellencies, allow me to remind my colleague ministers that we have a very busy day ahead of us. As per the program, we have 3 breakaway rooms, Lenana, Savo, Abadeas, and we shall be guided through that section immediately after the official opening. Allow me, Your Excellency, President of the Republic of Kenya, to thank you most profusely for accepting to grace this ministerial segment to flag us off to a very busy day. And without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together to welcome His Excellency, President William Ruto, to make his remarks. Thank you, Excellency.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Let's take our seats. Thank you very much. Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Nairobi. It's called the Green City in the Sun. Welcome to Kenya and welcome to the Africa Climate Summit. I have welcomed you to this great city on behalf of the people and government of Kenya to this meeting that is co-hosted by the Africa Union and the government of Kenya. Let me give you a bit of information that will make it easy to find your way around. Nairobi is a very interesting city. On one side, there's a full canopy forest. And on the other side, we have a wildlife national park. We keep the wildlife in the park because we have a fence. But sometimes, as nature would be, they break away from the fence. So while you are doing your morning walk, you might encounter a lion. Please be careful. It is not tamed, it is wild. Let me also inform you that Nairobi is the home of the United Nations Environmental Programme, the only UN agency headquarters in the global south. So, discussing matters environment, you are in the correct city. And if you need any referencing, the UNEP is right here. Let me also volunteer some additional information that Kenya, a few kilometers from where you are seated, scientists, including myself as a scientist, discovered and located the earliest remains of man on Earth. In other words, this is where humanity began. Before you guys went all over the place, in Europe and America and Asia and the rest of our continent, this is where we all began. And therefore, allow me to welcome you home. And in a few months, we are having a conversation as Kenyans. In a few months, we are seriously considering abolishing any visa requirement because it is unfair to ask anybody coming home for visa. I welcome all the delegates who responded positively to Africa's call to gather at this inaugural Africa Summit in order for us to imagine, design, and then build a future of prosperity for Africa and the world. You have just stepped into, let me take that again. You have not just stepped into a conference hall. You have entered the future, a future ripe with potential driven by global partnerships committed to African prosperity, inclusive growth, and a livable planet for all of us. Clearly, therefore, this is no ordinary summit. We are not here just to talk about Africa or climate change in the usual way, which often accentuates our divisions. You all remember the North versus South, developed versus developing, polluters versus victims, and the whole of that conversation. And even within our own government, sometimes we have conversations around economic development, so badly needed for us to achieve stable and dignified livelihoods, and is often cast as a trade-off with environmental stewardship as if they are mutually exclusive, when in actual fact, they are positively reinforcing. Let me be clear. These conversations are necessary Africa's carbon footprint remains small, but the human toll of climate change is disproportionately high. The urgency to address loss and damage and to configure appropriate financial mechanisms for resilience grows with each extreme weather event and each bout of climate-induced insecurity. A complex interplay of needs and responsibilities is a daily challenge, but it should not lead to a deadlock. We must be alert to the fact that they can sometimes blind us to the bigger picture. Delivering prosperity and well-being for Africa's growing population without pushing the world deeper into climate disaster is not just an abstract proposition or a mere wishful thinking. It is a real possibility proven by science and affirmed by emerging experience. An opportunity-oriented focus on climate action is the engine for propelling Africa into a realm of stability and prosperity, elevating us to middle-income status and beyond. This context is precisely what sets this climate summit apart from others. It aims to unite us across neighborhoods, across sectors, across institutions, local or international, across country borders, across continents, and across generations. It is because we all have a shared stake in the Earth's ability to sustain life that we must envision together a future that embraces the values of equality, human security, and shared prosperity. Africa possesses all the necessary conditions to realize this future. Our foremost asset is our young and growing young people and workforce, educated, skilled, and motivated to pursue industry, innovation, and enterprise. And we saw them here speak ably this morning. And I congratulate the young people who've been here for the last 3 days, and they have done a tremendous job in the Youth Summit. We have ample renewable energy potential as well, and the natural assets and resources to green our own consumption, but also to meaningfully contribute to decarbonization of the global economy. We must see in green growth not just a climate imperative, but also a fountain of multi-billion-dollar economic opportunities that Africa and the world is primed to capitalize. We are brought together by a clear understanding and deep concern about the inadequacy of our present means in terms of institutions and available finances to deal effectively with the magnitude of our collective threats and challenges. But we will not shy away from the difficult conversations and uncomfortable realities that must be addressed to achieve meaningful change. Policy, regulations, taxation, trade, and climate justice will all be scrutinized in national, regional, global contexts. Yet, the way we frame these discussions matters. I invite all of us to adopt opportunity lens as we navigate these complex dialogues. For a very long time, we have looked at this as a problem. It is time we flipped and looked at it from the other side. there are opportunities, immense opportunities as well. And that is why we are not here to catalog grievances and list problems. We are here to scrutinize ideas, assess perspectives, so that we can unlock solutions. The very format of this summit has been designed to facilitate such engagement. Over the next 3 days, be ready to be challenged in this dynamic ecosystem of dialogue and discovery. African and global leaders, innovation trailblazers, experts, investors, and captains of industry are here to explore the opportunities, tackle the barriers, and scale up solutions. While I cannot encapsulate the breadth and depth of all our program within my opening remarks, allow me to outline the overarching theme, which is the unparalleled opportunity that climate action represents for Africa. As you're aware, the climate conversation began 31 years ago in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. But this is the first African summit 31 years later. When my colleagues agreed, in the Africa Union that is, agreed to my offer to host this climate summit, it was clear to me that this inaugural summit is going to be the stepping stone to the ultimate resolution of this challenge. The reason why possibly we haven't made much progress is because Africa had not consolidated and assembled its ideas and brought them to the table. I am confident that now going forward, we have all what it takes to create a win-win outcome out of this very intense conversation about climate change. This occasion summons us to contemplate the full range of possibilities that can be unleashed by directing investment and appropriate technology to actualize our continent's abundant resource endowments. Let us look, for example, at food production and the protection and expansion of our invaluable natural carbon sinks, which stand at the intersection of our environment and ecology on one end, and economic opportunities on the other end. Since 1961, Africa has witnessed a 1/3 reduction in agricultural productivity due to climate change, a stark reminder of the urgent need for adaptation. Yet, much of the world is just waking up to the merits of restorative agriculture, a practice that already resonates with African farming practices. By building on the wealth of indigenous knowledge, we can scale, enhance, and even monetize our agricultural systems. This enables us to unlock the huge potential in our agricultural land assets, representing 2/3 of the world's uncultivated, underutilized arable land, to feed our growing populations, and to do so in harmony with our invaluable natural carbon sinks. Additionally, the restoration and expansion of Africa's natural carbon sinks are not just an environmental imperative. In fact, they are an unparalleled economic goldmine. They have the potential to absorb millions of tons of CO2 annually, which should translate into billions of dollars if we were living in a fair world, improve livelihoods, and millions of opportunities across this continent. And I was having a conversation yesterday about a banker of one of the big multinational banks. And he was telling me about Africa's GDP. And GDP is about assets. It's about what you have. We have the carbon sinks that serves the world, cleans our environment, acts as sequestration of carbon that is produced by others. But we get nothing for it. It's not anywhere in our balance sheet. Everybody's assets are in their balance sheet. Some of ours are not in that balance sheet. The day we put our whole assets in our balance sheet, you will know that we are a very wealthy continent. And let me say, we do all that, but it doesn't count for much. But we do it anyway, because we love this world, because it's our home. And that is why the conversation of North versus South must come to an end. Who did what? It's not a conversation that we have the luxury to engage in, because when the apocalypse happens, it will happen for all of us, for the entire humanity. Let me say this. We do this, and all of this comes while safeguarding our biodiversity. We are careful to make sure that is in place. Our renewable energy resources are not just environmental necessity. They are the ultimate catalyst of radical socio-economic prosperity. They can fuel sustainable development, drive economic growth, create jobs, and also uplift millions from energy poverty, all while reducing our carbon footprint continentally and globally. The possibilities are not just promising, they are transformative. Africa can power all our energy needs with renewable resources. The continent has enough potential to be entirely self-sufficient with the mixture of wind, solar, geothermal, sustainable biomass, and hydropower. In Africa, we can be a green industrial hub that helps other regions achieve their net zero strategies by 2050. In other words, what I'm saying is unlocking the renewable resources that we have in our continent is not only good for Africa, it is good for the rest of the world. Because we not only are driving our own growth, but we are ready to share these resources with the rest of the world, and by doing so, we will assist the rest of the world in ensuring that we move towards the net zero target that we all set for ourselves. And for Africa, renewable resources, it is not just the volume, but also the non-seasonality of our renewable energy that stands out. The nearly year-round sunshine makes Africa's solar potential particularly unique, perfectly suited to industrial energy demands, something that is challenging in other areas, especially in temperate climates. Kenya, for example, serves as a good example of what is possible. Our national grid currently operates at 3 gigawatts, with 93% of that power being renewable. Our ambition is audacious yet achievable: 100% renewable by 2030 and a 100 gigawatt grid entirely renewable by 2040. A serious challenge in bridging the investment gap in order to enable the continent meet its energy needs is the creation of demand on sufficient scale to provide incentives for appropriate private investment in energy infrastructure development. Industrial energy at scale is therefore necessary to anchor energy demand as a means of tackling the widespread energy poverty still prevalent across our continent. The numbers are stark. Nearly 600 million Africans lack access to electricity. Another 150 million grapple with unreliable power. And almost 1 billion have no access to clean cooking energy. But the abundance of our renewable resources, the possibilities offered by new technologies, and opportunities created by new climate financing offers enormous possibilities for us. We have the capability to provide reliable and cost roles to constructing and assembling electric motor vehicles, batteries, and other components. Let me invite you to this unprecedented geo-economic opportunity for Africa. We are already key players in the extraction of these minerals, but much of the higher value addition, smelting, refining, assembly, and even the production of electric motor vehicles happens elsewhere. Production of electric motor vehicles happens elsewhere. Let's put some numbers to add perspective to what I'm saying. By 2025, the mining of battery critical minerals, nickel, lithium, cobalt, is estimated to generate some $11 billion in value. However, if we take the next step and engage in value-added activities like refining these minerals into industrial-grade metals, that value could quadruple to $50 billion. And if we consider the end-to-end value chain for electric vehicles, including the battery pack and all other components, the market value skyrockets to an astonishing $7 trillion. That is a trajectory. What today we are selling for $11 billion could be $7 trillion if we engage in the right trajectory. And that is what we are saying. And that is what Madam Josefa was saying. What these figures clearly demonstrate is that Africa can no longer afford a minimalist, short-termist, raw material-based approach. The time has come for us to break out of the shackles of low ambition. We must now begin to aim higher and strive for more and better outcomes. As we work towards capturing more economic value from these opportunities, we are not just building a resilient and prosperous continent. We are also contributing to a more balanced and stable global economy. It is the only way, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to stop the migration using rickety boats from one continent to another. It is the way that we are going to stop the negativities. We need to balance our development, and we have the assets to do it. and we have the ambition to do it, and we want to do it together. Trillions of dollars globally are looking for green investment opportunities as the pressure to tackle climate change and crisis heightens. Africa holds the key to accelerating decarbonization of the global economy. It is a statement of fact. Africa holds the key to decarbonizing the global economy, whether it is industrialization, whether it's manufacturing. We are not just a continent rich in resources. We are a powerhouse of untapped potential, eager to engage and fairly compete in the global marketplace. Consider this. Every year, Africa needs to generate approximately 30 million jobs, new jobs for that matter, to accommodate its rapidly expanding workforce. These are not just numbers. They are not just statistics. These are 30 million opportunities to build our future, 30 million dreams that can be fulfilled through climate-proof avenues of growth, and 30 million steps towards shared prosperity. The examples I have shared with you are not mere statistics. They are pragmatic routes for Africa to not only participate in the global economy, but to excel and to grow. I accept that it is one thing to say what is possible, and entirely another to make it happen. For example, infrastructure is expensive. It needs finance and finely tuned policies to attract investors. It needs technical know-how and agile institutions. A major concern that we all know and we all appreciate is cost of capital in Africa, acting as a most prohibitive barrier to our progress. Private investors charge high premiums driven by both real but mostly perceived risks. It is not a secret that we are paying at least 5 times as much as advanced economies to borrow from the financial market. It's a fact, documented. Like many of us, a few years ago, I would have believed the challenges were too great and the barriers too high. Today, I see them differently, as mere tests of our collective will and ingenuity. We should develop effective policies and regulations that catalyze investment and entrepreneurship and unleash the creativity of local business. We must transform Africa's resource wealth from mere potential into real opportunities by directing large-scale investments that will actualize the possibilities that exist and await our citizens in present and in future generations. Let's make no mistake, however, we have no choice but to approach this colossal task with clear minds and open eyes. A lot needs to happen before Africa can live up to its full potential of providing climate solutions for its citizens and to the entire world. Over the next few days, I have no doubt that African leaders seated here and our friends from elsewhere will be open, honest, and direct about what we can commit and bring to the table and the type of the collaborations we need from our global partners. My call to everyone present in this historic summit is for us to work together and converge our efforts on African priorities. I urge everyone to make a contribution to our generation's unprecedented and highly consequential endeavor to catalyze climate action in a spirit of candor, collaboration, and courage. Let us imagine a pathway for different financial structures that can deliver on Africa's goals. Let us commit to invest in viable solutions presented by renewable energy, green industrialization, climate-smart agriculture, and nature conservation. I am confident that we are all inspired by the possibilities before us and galvanized by the demands of this critical time to engage productively, collaborate successfully, and conclude the Africa Summit with a Nairobi Declaration on green growth and climate finance agenda that will commit us to pursue a climate-positive path to propel Africa's economy and promote job creation in a manner that limits our emissions and aids global decarbonization efforts. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, friends, this summit is a moment to imagine a bold and radically affirmative African future. We are here to envision a continent that links markets and connects resources with demand, unlocking massive economies of scale, a continent that offers an economic backbone for a decarbonized world, a continent that thrives and shapes climate-proof future for all. So, as we immerse ourselves into the array of complex issues during the summit, let us fix our gaze firmly upon the horizon of possibilities. The future is not just something to hope for. Neither is it something to merely wish or wait for. The future is for us to conceptualize and actualize, starting now. That is what we have come to do at the Africa Climate Summit. Welcome to the future, and I thank you.
One more round of applause to all the speakers who have spoken so well. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Now we've come to the end of this session, so mine is just to give you some exit protocols. Very simply, we're going to have what we call a family photo with His Excellency, the President. And so we are inviting the AU leadership and all the ministers, including our cabinet secretaries, to join His Excellency for this photo. So what we'll do is that at the point we're exiting, kindly let's allow His Excellency and the leadership to exit first, followed by the ministers. I'll request that we all remain in the room. Then after that, we will be free to take a short break. But for now, we'll all be upstanding kindly as we allow His Excellency, the President, the AU leadership, and the ministers to proceed to the photo shoot. The photo will be taken at the main entrance to KICC. We do have some protocol officers who are going to guide us on that. So we proceed to the main entrance of KICC, where we have an arrangement for all the ministers together with His Excellency, the President, to take the family photo. Otherwise, have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day. Other than the
That was the official opening ceremony of the Africa Climate Summit and Africa Climate Week, officially opened by President William Ruto. We also had other speakers make their remarks. He has continued his championing of a partnership between the, quote, global north and global south, saying that it cannot continue to be a blame game of who did what, and that the two must come together and chart a course forward, lest his words, we end up in Armageddon. And he's calling for greater investment where energy is concerned, saying Africa, the African continent, has the capacity to power the globe industrially without relying on fossil fuel. The other area he has talked about is the labor market, that Africans have solutions to the problems, and that will prevent the migration we have been witnessing. And therefore, he says the debt burden must be addressed. He's also addressed the question of food security on the continent. And these are just some of the areas that will be canvassed in the course of the next 3 days. So the Africa Summit runs between today, tomorrow, and Wednesday, and the Africa Climate Week ends on Friday. As we saw yesterday when he attended the Africa Youth Climate Summit, he drove himself to the Kenyatta International Convention Center in an e-vehicle, that is an e-car, and his motorcade was the same, and that is as they push to bring an end to fossil fuels. We now cross over to the Kenyatta International Convention Center, where we have a team on ground, including Zainab Wandati and Joe Ageo. I'll hand you over, but remain in studio, keeping an eye on the events there.
Thank you, Olive. We suffered a technical hitch there for a moment. The Africa Climate Summit has officially kicked off. The official opening ceremony has just concluded. And down here, President William Ruto is leading other heads of state and delegates in a photo session before the program can continue. We've been joined by Joe Ageo, the legendary Joe Ageo.
Come on. No, but I mean, it's familiar territory. You know, I think this is an interesting meeting, Zainab, because many people would say for the first time Africa is taking back the initiative. You know, yes. Many times when you talk about climate change, there's been this idea that other people cause the problems, but we are taking the tab on this end of the world. And I think that to the extent that this is Africa stepping out there and saying, hey, we are stakeholders in this, and we're not only victims, but we can also play a part in trying to find solutions to the climate crisis. And I think this is to that extent, it's a really significant conference. And I can see that the president, who's somewhere down there taking photos, has been taking a real initiative, one would say, perhaps because of his own background as a scientist and yes. all of that. But I think he's, to be fair, I mean, he has tried to project himself out there as a voice on the African continent for this question of climate change. And Kenya traditionally has been a leader yes. in this field with our renewable energy, the first climate act that was passed in 2016. So in a sense, this is Kenya really setting the pace, and it is, I think, it can only be fitting that this conference, the inaugural one, happening in Kenya.
And the president today actually came in an electric vehicle. Yeah. And what maybe people don't know is that that vehicle is made in Kenya.
Oh, yes. And
that vehicle is made in Kenya. He had the same vehicle yesterday.
Yes, and in the course of the day, we'll be speaking to some of the people behind that vehicle. Yes. But it really is, I think, instructive that this is happening in Kenya. The vehicle he came in is made in Kenya, assembled largely here. And then looking at the people who have come here, this is not just an African conversation, Zainab.
Yes. Although there are concerns that it's supposed to be an African conversation, but 60%, more than 60% of the side events are Global North events. And Bernard Mwinzi is at Green Park Terminus. There's something happening there. A group of activists are there complaining.
A climate march, I think, was supposed to happen.
A climate march. And one of the reasons they're complaining, one of the things they're complaining about is the fact that the Global North has the vast majority of the side events
which I think is a perennial problem that's been that asymmetry yes. Of knowledge generation, of all kinds of things that relate to climate change, that imbalance between the north, south, And I know the president has been trying to reframe this conversation, saying, well, this is not as North versus the South, but that's a reality I think that we'll have to deal with. And yes, as you mentioned, this Africa Climate Summit, just one more reminder that there is still some work to be done there.
Yes, but do you think the president's agenda to try and change the conversation when it comes to financing, do you think that's a good plan? You've been covering this space much longer than me.
Well, I mean, the question of money has always been on the table. I think there was, for example, at Rio, this is the Rio of 1992, a principle that was set in that Rio Declaration. They called it common but differentiated responsibilities. And the idea back then was that there are countries that have contributed immensely towards many of the global problems. At that time, it was not just about climate change. But the idea was that everybody has a part to play. And on this money issue, it was driven by the fact that the global north industrialized earlier, and therefore they bear the greatest burden in terms of causing the problem of climate change. And therefore, they needed to exactly, because the problem that Africa faces is that we are getting the sharp end of this problem. And so, to the extent that the north is responsible, it was morally right that they put some money on the table to deal with what we've called here adaptation, just to help us cope with the impacts. But that hasn't been forthcoming because, Zainab, remember, this climate question is not just a scientific problem. If it was merely a scientific problem, we wouldn't be here. At the end of the day, it is also a political problem because, look, if you're going to give money to whoever, some African country, and you're somewhere in Sweden, in America, whatever, you can't just wake up and do it. Some parliament will have to ratify it. You'll have to deal with domestic concerns in that country if there's unemployment, jobs, and whatever in your own country. So you'd still have to convince your national parliament, your politicians, the domestic politics, and all of that. And at the end of the day, there is also the geopolitics, the global order, as one would say. If you're the United States of America, you're also thinking about your competitiveness globally. So you're thinking, if I do this, will this give China, for example, a competitive advantage? Yeah. So I don't think that just looking at this narrowly sometimes helps. It is good to appreciate the global dynamic that is at play, but of course that is not to say that these people shouldn't own up. I mean, they made the commitments, and it is just good for them to honor what they have pledged. But there is a bigger superstructure there that sometimes gets lost in the conversation about financing.
Yes, but if they did honor that 100 billion pledge that always comes up in the COPs, what guarantee does Kenya have that they will honor the request that Kenya is making at this Africa Climate Summit?
Sadly, zero guarantee. I think this is why the conversation has to keep going. I remember when we were going to Copenhagen, 2009, this was billed as the biggest COP at the time because it was supposed to come up with a regime that was going to replace the Kyoto Protocol that was expiring. And at the time, this whole question of the 100 billion, the adaptation fund, and all manner of pledges were made there. And I would dare say that there are many people who lost their momentum, who was disillusioned by this whole conversation about climate change following the failure, as it were, at Copenhagen to come up with something that was more promising. At the end of the day, I think many people would say that Copenhagen was a major turning point, and not in a positive way.
And not in a positive way. So Africa is hoping to take the Nairobi Declaration to COP28, and the expectation that it's going to be to encompass everything that Africa wants. But there's always that concern that, yes, you go into that COP28 with one voice, and then you get there and individual country interests start to supersede. You hold a bilateral with the US here, bilateral with the UK there, and you get some money. Already Kenya has gotten some money today from the UK to fund climate activities. How can Africa work better to consolidate its voice going forward?
I think, first of all, to just give some understanding, I think whenever we say the Africa position, there is always an assumption that Africa is one thing. But the truth of the matter is that even within the African continent, countries are at different points. Countries are governed differently. For example, if you are going to pass something in Kenya, it works differently from even our neighbors, Tanzania, for example, or in Burundi, or in Algeria, or whatever. So at that level, first of all, there is a problem within the African continent, just at the domestic level, that every country has its own priorities, and that's a natural thing throughout the world. But more importantly is the fact that we assume that the global north is interested in Africans speaking as one voice. And so they are only too glad, in my view, to
If
have
you're
all these
divided.
bilaterals and
Yes.
just strike a deal here with this person and the other person. And then we are left wondering whether we truly mean what we say when we talk about the African position. So I think ultimately most countries now recognize, and that's a good thing, recognize how serious the climate problem is. And I think that domestic solutions, the subnational solutions that people undertake in the counties, for example, in our case, and whether it is funded by the UK or wherever, let there be some action happening. And I think for me that is what is really important. We can continue to pursue the ambitious for sort of the global pacts that we have, the arrangements such as the African continent and all of that. But I think ultimately what happens at the local level is what really makes a difference for every country.
Yeah, so the Africa Climate Week is also happening, and there have been a lot of concerns that Kenya does not seem to have been properly prepared for this summit. The chaos, you saw the chaos at Charter Hall trying to access your badge. The chaos.
Yes, the accreditation has been messy. I mean, yesterday we couldn't even cover some things. Yeah.
And even
I would
accessing
not
this
tell
site
you what
today.
they wrote on my accreditation, but I'm here all the
But
same.
you're here, thank God. And also accessing KICC this morning itself is also a nightmare. So if you're planning on coming to the Africa Climate Summit and you're not at KICC yet, perhaps you might want to wait for the president to leave. And that will be maybe towards the middle of the day, and then you can come, and then it might be easier then. But we hope to see a lot of activity. We had thought that the Africa Climate Week could be held at the UN, but we've been told no, everything is going to happen here at KICC. However, we still have Helen Aura on ground and Leon Digu following the Africa Climate Summit. I don't know if we have them on standby yet. We have Kevin Mutai also in Mombasa who will be talking to us. You know, we're here in Nairobi talking about climate change, but kwa ground, watu wanaelewa climate change ni nini. Unajua ni muhimu
that's what
hapo.
is really happening. I was speaking to some farmers, some livestock breeders or keepers, whatever you call them, in Kajiado County where I live. And one of them told me, and I think sometimes we complicate issues. I mean, I don't think that people have to articulate this thing and call it climate change or whatever. At the end of the day, it is, are people getting affected? And yes, they know that something has changed dramatically in their patterns. For example, in Kajiado, they knew by a certain month, they would go to Wundanyi or whatever, take their livestock there because there would be green grass there at that time. And they had almost like a calendar which worked like clockwork. But right now it doesn't work that way. So they know that something has changed. So if you were to go there and explain to them what that means for them and how they can help themselves out of this, then they will get it because it is beginning to affect them. And you know, yesterday Zainab, a friend of mine, a colleague, a contemporary in the industry, sent me a message and said, you know what, when I see this climate summit, I thought about you. Then I said, what's the problem? I'm not organizing it. Then they said, no, but you know, you guys started talking about this thing way before people recognized how serious it was. And that is how it was those days when we were covering these stories about climate change, because it looked like a distant thing. Stories would sound like scientists are warning that in the next 20 years or whatever, this will happen. But right now, nobody needs to tell you it will happen in the next whatever number of years. You can see the impacts. You can see how erratic the rainfall patterns, for example, have become. And so it is perhaps a good thing because the awareness is now there. People are now more acutely aware of the impacts and they can relate it to their daily living. I was interviewed sometime 20 years ago on a radio station in South Africa. I'd gone for a conference, and one of the things that I said to this guy was that even as journalists, we are only effective to the extent that we are able to relate these stories that we do on the environment to people's daily lives. And I think that climate change is now one such issue that is a lot easier to relate to people's daily lives as opposed to how it was a few years ago when it looked like a conversation that only involved experts and scientists and Greenpeace and all kinds of activists. Yeah.
Like last night, Kevin Mutai had a story about the impact of climate change at the coast, the rising sea level, and how communities are starting to lose their homes because they're being swept away into the ocean. And also there was a story from, I think it was Elgeyo Marakwet, about the Sengwer community who feel sidelined, by the way. They wanted to have participated in this summit as indigenous communities, but they feel sidelined. We also have children, lots of children from across the continent who feel that this summit has not been all-inclusive. They had hoped to send at least 500 of them here, but their pavilion was cut down. to just about 100, and they're not happy about it.
And it comes down to what I was telling you, that the climate question is not just about the science. It is also political. That is now about climate justice. Are people feeling that they're included in whatever solutions people are talking about here? There are people who feel marginalized. If you talk about the Senguer and all other indigenous communities, they live more than anyone else with nature, with the environment. They live in forests, and therefore their livelihoods are more directly linked to the natural environment. And that means that any discussion revolving around anything you want to do with the natural environment, you need to put them at the center of it, because one, if you do not include them, then your chances of success are also limited. If you, for example, you exclude forest communities that neighbor the forest, and you sort of treat the forest as some alien thing that is to be protected from people, then you run the risk of these very people beginning to develop a negative attitude towards the forest. And that is some thinking that has evolved in environmental circles over the years, where there is now the idea of participatory management of the natural environment. And I think that is something that needs to be at the center of even this. The youth, if you talk about them, I mean, again, climate justice, because you're talking about intergenerational intergenerational justice, where they're saying, look, you guys are messing up this thing, but you're going to die soon and leave us with the mess. Exactly, and so the young people, again, I've seen a number of them speaking here, but they perhaps need to be involved more in the conversations that happen around climate change, just for that very reason, if for nothing else, that they, in the natural course of events, will live longer than the older people, and therefore they will pick up the mess and try and fix it. So the gender question, so this whole justice issue around climate change, it's a big thing in every meeting that you go. And I think that we need to start getting it right if climate change is to be sorted out. Like I told you, we can get all the scientific solutions we want, but as long as we do not sort out the political questions around it, the questions of justice, the questions of youth, gender, and all the aspects that deal with the fact that this is an issue that touches people's daily lives, yes, then we will really have a problem dealing with climate change.
You know, you mentioned the political will and the political environment of climate change. And at COP28 last year, for the first time, we had a couple of members of parliament attending the summit, and they had their own meeting on the side, because they said, you guys come here, you talk about, you make all these kind of decisions, and then you come home, you bring bills to us, you've not taken us through them, we don't understand what's going on. How about you involve us right from the start? So even at this summit, there's supposed to be a parliamentary, they're calling it an interparliamentary dialogue, something like that, that is going to involve lots of members of parliament from across Africa. And I've seen, from the program, I've seen Senate Speaker, the House Assembly Speaker, National Assembly Speaker, as the chief guest at that summit. So Joe, having covered climate change for as long as you have, what are your expectations for the summit?
Oh, so a friend of mine was telling me that he went to a country called Bhutan, and it's considered to be one of the happiest places on earth. And so when he inquired from a friend of his who comes from that country, like, how is it that you guys are very happy and you're not even the richest country in the world? Then they said, we like to keep our expectations very modest. And that's it's a way of making of being happy in life. But to be honest, for me, I have taken a different view. Every time people say these meetings are all useless, people just come and talk. And I think that talking, first of all, helps, because it keeps the climate change agenda in everybody's face. So you come here, even if you were just a visitor in Nairobi, you wonder what is going on here. And that's a conversation about climate change. So the first level for me of expectation is that there would be conversations that can trigger action, whatever that action is. And what I mean by whatever action, I learned from Wangari Maathai that it doesn't matter how big or small the action is, something will happen somewhere. And that's a good thing. But of course, at the more fundamental level, there are many lofty things that are said, climate positive growth. Every meeting such as this usually has something that, a byword that is thrown about. But at the end of the day, and there's a lot of noise here, helicopters circulating around because of the security. I mean, even when we were coming here, it was difficult to access the place. But this is the thing, that at the end of the day, what one expects from a meeting like this is that there will be some movement at least, particularly with regard to the issue of financing. Because for us in this part of the world, and particularly because this is an Africa-centric, or at least that is what we have been made to believe, an Africa-centric summit, you would expect that the the sharp end of this thing that Africa is grappling with is how to deal with the impacts. That is called in technical jargon here adaptation, and tied to that is money. So for me, at the end of the day, if there can be some real commitment that is actionable, that someone can follow up about money that's coming to Africa to deal with the impacts of climate change, or people who are already dealing with this, whether it is in terms of the frequent droughts. We've talked about things like livestock insurance, for example. I mean, it is heartbreaking to see over the last, I think during the drought, I drove a lot around Kajiado, and to see the number of carcasses just littering the road, and to think that these people have no recourse is a problem. And those kinds of, and that's just one example. There are many people who have dealt with various types of losses, and to think that they do not have a recourse, I think it is truly unfair, considering that we know what the trigger of this thing is and where it's coming from. So the biggest expectation, in one word, money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So we said the Africa Climate Week is also underway, and we have Helen Aura and Leon Lidigu on standby to tell us a little bit about what to expect from that side. And when we come back here to studio, we're going to talk to some Kenyans who are attending the summit to know what their expectations are, including the Kenyan who's involved in the making of the vehicle that the president has been driving around. Leon, Helen?
Well, Zainab, thank you very much. We're here at the United Nations. Well, all the fun and buzz is happening at KICC. Several meetings are also happening here at the United Nations, more so trainings, and also including matters youth and climate change, youth's impact in climate change, as well as matters carbon credit. This particular week, actually, my colleague and I am also joined by Leon Lidigu, my colleague. We're also going to be touching on matters youth climate for action. Youth play a key role when it comes to climate change, and more so as they think as though they have been left out in the conversation. But today we're also going to find out, we're going to be joined by several youth who are going to tell us more and chime into the conversation, telling us more of what needs to be done, what are the impacts of climate change, because a lot of youth in the country actually suffer from climate change, as well as funding for youth in climate matters is quite low, actually a drop in the ocean. Leon, what are you looking forward to this conference actually?
Number one, I'm expecting protests. Yes, there's no good climate summit in the world that does not have protests. You know, young people just chanting and running around. Yeah. But more importantly, the Nairobi Declaration. Yes. You get to know, we want to know what does the last 3 days, what are they going to give us in return? Mm-hmm. It's an investment. Mm-hmm. People have traveled globally. They have come here. There's a lot of conversation. Remember at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, we had the loss and damage fund kitty that was set up. It's, to me, in my view, it's actually an empty bucket. So I'm waiting to see if there's something that will be done to it. Then there's also the conversation on carbon credits, which we have stumbled upon at the UN headquarters, which is also happening. So it's also fascinating because earlier today morning, there were some concerns that there might be a greenwashing agenda around it. So we'll get to hear from the experts and the conversations that are going around. But also I've seen a lot of interesting guys from the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change who are around. There also a meeting on Article 6 that is happening. So we should be covered and just get to know a lot of good things that are happening.
I'm also keen to understand after this summit, when it comes to matters youth and climate financing, according to a report by UNICEF, actually, Leon, only 2.4% of global funding goes into matters climate financing. And climate change affects not only children, adults, but the youth as well. So after this summit, I'm hoping that even African nations can be able to be well equipped when it comes to matters climate financing and adaptability. But one thing I'm also keen to understand, when it comes to the African region and the African continent, our global emission is way less than 10%. We have key players such as China, key players such as the United Nations, the United States, who are on 20%, 15% going upwards. And when it comes to matters funding and financing, when such key players are actually saying they will not actually release money when it comes to the mess that has been done outrightly. So what should we expect as an African region? Actually, and before even we go further, Zainab, we're joined by several partners from the UNDP. I'm joined by Mr. Tessa from UNDP. Mr. Tessa, welcome to NTV. Mr. Tessa, kindly, the training that is going around as of now, when everyone else is at KICC, I do understand the technicians are here. Give us more insight what we're looking forward to this training that's going to happen today, Matters Carbon Credits.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. We are here, we are bringing here a representative from a different country in Africa to solve the issue of climate change. Countries have many financial instruments, and one of them is carbon market. So with the support of UNFCCC, government representatives from across Africa are coming here to learn more about what is that instrument, how can it use them, and how can them contextualize them to their specific context, but also how can it use the knowledge that they're going to have here and replicate that to within their countries. So that's why we are here today.
Some key stakeholders believe when it comes to carbon markets, it's eventually going to play out as the white elephant in the room. Do you believe that's going to be the case, or African nations can, and the world at large, can be able to handle the market as well?
Carbon market, as every other issues, come with some risk, some important risk. So the most important thing is to put in place the regulatory framework, the tools that will allow us to minimize the risk, to make sure that the carbon credit that are sold in the market are carbon credit from high integrity, as we say. So when I say high integrity, it means that there's additionality, and there's additionality, and they can be measured, and they represent really emission reduction. They are real emission reduction. Yes. If we can achieve that, we are going to have a high integrity market, and I think we will be able to move from the risk or all these kind of issue that we are talking about, like hot air and others.
All right. Coming closer home, where we are in the host country in Kenya, do you believe we are ready?
I think Kenya is moving to the right direction. Kenya is, because I'm working across Africa, what I can see, what I can tell you, Kenya is well ahead of many other countries when we talked about carbon market. Kenya is already selling into the voluntary carbon market. Kenya has just passed a new law on climate change and carbon market, something that you're not going to see in many other countries in Africa. So Kenya is so well positioned right now. Yeah. Yes, and I believe that Kenya will do well.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. Well, Zainab, before I hand over to you, I'm going to give Leon to also interview one of the guests that we have here today. Leon, you can take over.
Thank you so much, Helen. When I was making rounds, I came across a very interesting guest. I wish to introduce Mr. Andreas. Yes. How are you, sir?
I'm fine. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Please tell us a bit about yourself and introduce yourself.
Okay, my name is Andrea Camponogara. I'm the Global Coordinator of the Regional Collaboration Centers of the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat. And it's centers that are located in 6 different countries, covering all the region on our planet, and just providing support to countries for their commitment under the Paris Agreement.
Yes, I get very encouraged when I hear the word support. It's a very interesting word because we, as the Global South, are a country that causes the least amount of emissions, but we bear the biggest brunt in terms of climate change. Now, you are here also discussing about technology. How can we leverage on technology to ensure that we get out of this mess?
Well, I would say... It's okay. So can we stop? Because this is not the question I was expecting, sorry.
Okay. You are doing technology on day 3?
On day 3, but it's, there will be a CTCN NDE forum. CTCN is the Climate Technology Network, which is established under the convention, which is supposed to provide assistance to country in identify and deploy climate change technology that helps reducing emission and coping with the adverse effect.
Okay, and my last question will be, what is the importance of Article 6 and the training that you are here in terms of climate?
Yeah, this is a 4 days training on Article 6. Article 6 is a very important instrument established under the Paris Agreement. And they give possibility to countries and all stakeholders in general to come together, voluntarily cooperate to achieve the emission reduction target established by countries under the NDCs, so the National Determined Contribution.
Oh, thank you very much. So concurrently, as the climate summit is happening at KICC, there's also the training that is ongoing here, which I think, Helen, is very important.
Yes, very much so. Actually, Leon, you asked a very good question. When it comes to the role of technology, when it comes to carbon emission, before I hand over to studio, we're going to speak to several key players, even at KICC, who are going to give us more insight and more knowledge. But one thing before we hand over to our next reporter on the line, we have to inform the audience that today afternoon we're expecting
a party.
Absolutely.
Giuliani. I mean, it's going to be an amazing. We have poetry. We have amazing guests. And we are heading down there.
Yes. So there's going to be actually an event for youth of the country regarding matters climate action, and very much so the role of the youth when it comes to climate change and what is their voice? Do they have a voice when it comes to matters climate change? We will keep you well informed. See you at around 1 to 3 p.m. Over to you, Kevin Mutai.
Good morning and thank you. We are joining this broadcast live from Mama Ngina waterfront in Mombasa County, and here there's a beehive of activity, and opposite to where I'm standing are traders selling their different wares. Of course, also this is the key and an entry point to the Mama Ngina waterfront, a recreational facility established by the national government under the national museums, where tourists, both local and international tourists, are flocking every day to just get a breeze and relax here in Mombasa. But I have seen some of them who've just arrived here. Let's quickly have a word or two regarding what's really happening in Nairobi, the Africa Climate Summit. This is a key opportunity for the African heads of states and of course also different stakeholders to engage on matters climate change. Sir, you're live on NTV. I see you just walked in. Introduce yourself, where you're coming from, and tell us your understanding about what is happening in Nairobi with regards to the Africa Climate Summit.
My name is Mike Anazodo. I'm coming from Nigeria, West Africa. This is our first time in Mombasa. Climate change, I can talk about climate change in Nigeria.
Of course, that is Africa.
Yeah, of course, that's Africa. Definitely, climate change is real. Coming from where I come from, the winds are getting very strong, much stronger. The coastal lines are being washed away. The level of water is increasing astronomically. In fact, in the past 5 years, there's been this serious flooding, of villages, towns in Nigeria, and quite a lot has been lost in terms of millions of dollars, actually. So it's real.
Well, this is an opportunity for the African heads of state who are currently in Nairobi to discuss this matter and come up with solutions as a united continent to just probably advise on some of the policy frameworks that the continent plus working together with the international community should take to mitigate this effect. So what could be your proposal to those who are in attendance those who are partaking or attending this conference?
The only thing I will say is that it's normal for conferences like this to come and go, and nothing really. Solutions are provided, but they are never put into practice. So I'll just say that for them to realize that livelihoods and lives are at stake, and they should do their best to make sure that whatever is decided, they should go ahead and make sure it's carried out.
Thank you so much. Joe, before I hand it over back to you, let me just give an opportunity to one of the local residents here. Ukianza kwa majina waitwa nani? Alafu tueleze, je, wafahamu mabadiliko ya tabia nchi?
Naam, kwa majina naitwa Rama Krishna, mfanyikazi wa Mama Ngina na ni mkaazi wa Likoni. Naam.
Kuna kongamano ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Je, waifahamu?
Naam, kuifahamu kwa kuisikia tu kwa sababu ya kongamano na venye kunaendelea, ndio.
Haufahamu lingine lolote?
Sina la zaidi.
Well, clearly there's need for sensitization to the local communities here in the coast region who are the direct people affected, facing these threats created by the climate change, including the rise in sea levels and of course also drought witnessed in some parts of the coastal counties such as Taita Taveta County. So clearly environmentalists have been pushing for a sober approach towards sensitizing the communities here, of course also towards sustainable use of marine resources. So that's it from Mombasa County. Until some other time, we'll be back with more regarding this particular topic. Back to you, Joe and Zainab at KICC Nairobi.
Thank you very much. Kevin Mutai there, reporting from Mombasa. This is our continued coverage of the Africa Climate Summit. We are covering this for you from all dimensions, from the ground, where the real brunt of climate change is being felt by communities around the country. But we're also having conversations that matter right here at the KICC, where it's all happening. The president speaking a little bit earlier. But right now, I have a panel of 3 gentlemen here. I hope that we can add a bit of gender diversity here in a short while. But I'm going to introduce my panel right now because they're going to help us understand various dimensions of this conversation that is beginning today in many respects and going on all the way to the 6th. And right next to me, Dr. Isaac Kalua Green. He's an ecopreneur and also founder Green Africa Foundation. And Dr. Kalua, you'll be telling us a little bit about that vehicle that the president rode on coming to this place. Next to him is I know this gentleman from another world, Mr. Tennyson Williams. Nice to meet you. He's the Africa Director of the World Animal Protection. He'll be telling us what animals have got to do with climate change. And last but not least, John Kioli. He's a member of the Climate Change Council that is here in Kenya, recently inaugurated, but he's also the chair of the Kenya Climate Change Working Group here in Kenya, but covering various parts of the continent. And I will start with you, Mr. Kioli. An important conference, some will say, for Africa. What is at stake here from where you stand?
I think, thank you very much for this opportunity. For me, the issues are surrounding energy transition. I think His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, mentioned that Africa has a lot of potential. As you may be aware, Africa has 2,000 to 3,000 hours of solar. That can translate to around 10 terawatts. That means that the potential is there, but is untapped. He also mentioned about issues of potential that is not tapped, of carbon credits. And I think this is a very major conversation because we have a wealth of carbon sinking in Africa that is untapped, that is undocumented, and Africa is always seen as a continent that is warring, a continent that is lost, a continent that is always seeking for help. Yet the potential is us. The third thing I think that is very key in this conference is about awareness creation. We know that all these issues about like e-mobility, we have all the minerals in Africa, but they are not developed in Africa. So when we talk about awareness creation, is to bring that awareness creation in terms of potential. What potential do we have in Africa? And then lastly is issue of discussing issue as a continent. We want one Africa, one voice in terms of negotiating issues in COP28 coming in Dubai.
But I've heard, Mr. Kioli, some people say in this conference, one of the greatest criticisms I've heard so far, that a lot of events, if you look at side events and whatnot, are driven by people from outside Africa. Is this really a truly African conversation?
And that's the potential we want to tap, because we always seen like suffering, we always seen like we are chasing the wind, but yet the potential is in here. So how can we start thinking of a producer of carbon credits instead of always asking how much are you selling the carbon credits? It's us to determine, because the potential is in Africa. Number two, the issue of production of EV vehicles should be done in Africa, as one of the companies has done in Kenya, so that we can tap that opportunity, because all the metals are in Africa. And the potential is only the technology transfer that we need to be able to facet that.
Yeah, and I'm going to come to you, Mr. Williams, in a moment. Dr. Green has talked about electric vehicles, and you have something to do with that. And yesterday, was it? The president was riding in this vehicle that I said you tell us something about.
Well, I think what we are now thinking about and talking about in matters of climate change is moving from plan to action. And nothing is as potent as the silent influence of a good example. It is one thing for leaders to say that they are going to transit from renewable energy, from the fossils, but it is completely a different ballgame when you actually practically show what you're doing. And that is what the President of Kenya has done. An innovation of one of globally top institutions, working with a Kenyan company whose CEO is 24-year-old. Her name is Joy. And the president is riding in that vehicle and showing the power of e-mobility in this country, because he's also having outriders who are also using electric vehicles. And you can imagine the movement of such a vehicle, how much you can be able to save. The one that the president is using, you can have it in full charge for about the cost of Kenya shillings 750. And therefore, movement of 1 kilometer is about 2 shillings. And it can do 300 kilometers and another one for 200. And it's an innovation of the young people. You can imagine how many people will want now to drive an electric car. If the president is doing it, how would a minister be coming into a place with a 5,000 cc vehicle when the president is doing zero emission? And that is what we have been lacking in Africa. That we are crying, yet we have the highest use of big SUVs per capita compared even to UK. That if you want to see big cars, go to Kenya, go to Africa. That's where they belong. Not here in Europe, not here in the first world. And I think it's a very profound message that needs to be emulated, and we look forward to many more people uptaking this. Vehicles now are being done locally. We have motorcycles that are being produced locally. The car that the president is driving in now is going to be produced locally, meaning there will be soon local components done by the Numerical Machining Institution, but even more important, the fact that it is going to be assembled locally is a profound thing that is a game changer and that can save government and individuals a lot of money.
And we'll talk about those solutions in a moment. Mr. Tennyson, let me come to you now. I mean, you come to this from an interesting direction. Animal protection, and many times when people talk about climate change, that's not a dimension that people talk about. To what extent is this getting voice in a meeting like this, and what has animal protection got to do with it?
Thanks for having me, Joe. And that's the reality. The conversation around climate has focused on fossil fuel for far too long. It's appreciated there has not been serious progress in that direction. But we as an organization working around what animal protection should all be about is saying that there is a new culprit that we need to recognize in this whole debate. And that culprit is factory farming. To suggest that we can only feed ourselves now and in the future if we industrialize our agricultural system is a fallacy. Because the truth is that comes with another cost. Joe, the argument that because we are going to industrialize our systems will solve the problem, we disagree with that. Urbanization...
But doesn't that contend with the fact that, I mean, there is a serious food shortage, for example, in Africa, food insecurity, one would say, perhaps more than shortage. Where does this square? Because if you're saying that we shouldn't industrialize agriculture, what is the practical alternative? Because it's all very good to talk about animal protection and all of these things. But what is this tangible thing, alternative, that you will tell that African man, woman, child somewhere who is thinking about what they're going to eat next?
Yes, but we have to invest in our indigenous production systems. 70% of our food consumed in Africa comes from smallholder systems. So we need to invest more in those systems. We have to promote our local foods. And they are more healthier than these industrialized food systems. That's the point we are making. And in those systems, the cruelty that animals go through is unbelievable. I don't think that's right, because they are sentient beings. We also need to take care of them. And that's the argument we are presenting here in this summit, that there is a new culprit which we all need to be aware of, and it's not good for all of us.
So what are you saying when you come to a summit like this? Who are you talking to? What are you placing on the table? And more importantly, when this summit is all done and dusted, what are you going to hope to have achieved in terms of this idea of rethinking our production systems insofar as livestock is concerned?
Well, we need to promote humane, sustainable agricultural systems, which means we have to invest more in the rangelands. Africa is not short of land. The truth of the matter, even here in Kenya, in northeastern Kenya, where we have huge number of animals perishing every time we have droughts, the truth of the matter is we need to look into those production systems and invest into how we can have water year-round, which is something we can do, as opposed to pointing finger at the north to say they are the ones responsible because they emit a lot of carbon, and that carbon is what we are receiving here in the southern hemisphere. The truth of the matter is we also contribute, and we need to start looking at home. And that's why we are saying the argument is not how much aid we continue to receive. It is how much investments that we continue to receive in a partnership that gives Africa the opportunity to be at the driving seat. For once, we want all our leaders in Africa to have one clear message. And that message is, in addition to fossil fuel, which is a culprit, a new culprit called factory farming is here and now. We need to recognize that, because that's not going to solve Africa's problem.
Let's John, you have had all these conversations about North, South, and Mr. Williams talked a little bit about that. The president has been saying, oh, this is not about the North and the South, but the reality, many people will say, is there is a history to this thing. There are people who are more responsible than others. There are people who are taking the biggest brunt here in Africa. Isn't there a place to say that someone should pick up the tab, and that someone is the people who are most responsible for causing the problem in the first place? What do you think is a place of this conversation about finance, where we are saying the money needs to come here because there are people who are already dealing with the sharpest end of this climate change crisis?
Yeah, thank you very much. As you are aware, Joe, Africa is responsible for only 4% of the global carbon emissions. In Kenya, it's about 0.00 something. So clearly, there is an element of polluter pays principle that comes into place. We know that all these issues started during the agrarian revolution, the industrial revolution, and we found ourselves suffering because somebody somewhere was generating a lot of industrial smoke and all that. Now, this narrative has been there for some time. And last year, during COP27, a basket of money was formed, and this basket is called loss and damage. We are looking at the next phase of populating the loss and damage. Look at the 2.5 million animals that died in Kenya the last 2 years. Who is going to compensate this? These are not just animals. These are income. These are bank accounts of our pastoralists. So there is a framework that is coming up, but I think the narrative now is changing because we are looking at what opportunities does this avail to us. And His Excellency the President pronounced himself that a time has come to change this suffering into opportunities. We have just noticed that Africa has the highest decarbonization potential, and that is domiciled in Africa. But nobody talks about it. We're always crying of who will buy our carbon credits. If we organize ourselves very well, and one of the key pillars of this summit is the policy dialogue. How can we talk in one voice as Africa? Africa, one voice. Then people will stop and listen to us because they must come to Africa. If we go to negotiate, and then the negotiators divide us in small island states, they divide us into developed countries, they divide us into least developed countries, then they can manage us because you're in small elements. Divide and rule works very much in...
But we see that very much, Mr. Kioli, when we go, for example, whether it's a COP, where, one hears about the Africa position on this and the other thing, but before you know it, individual African nations are, doing bilaterals with different nations, and in some respects even undermining what sometimes would be the collective position of the continent. To what extent do you think the continent is speaking with one voice when it comes to such a crucial issue as climate change, which is affecting the continent disproportionately considered, compared to the other parts of the world where the problem is emanating from?
Yeah, and that's a narrative His Excellency the President of the Republic of Kenya was trying to change, that it's time for Africa to stand up and say, we want things in a different plate. We don't want to go with a begging plate. Look, Joe, the fact is climate change is about poverty. Climate change is about money. Climate change is about technology transfer. But now we have just noticed, or we have realized, that the potential of Africa, we have non-seasonal kind of renewable energy, the potential in geothermal, the potential in solar, the potential in wind, and the potential with other renewable energy sources is unlimited. Now, we need to turn this into opportunities. We need to go to negotiate as a bloc. We need to run away from divide and rule. And that was the singing that was in the room today, that Africa needs to go one Africa, one voice. You will be able to manage negotiations.
Dr. Green, there's this whole idea of the environment, in this case climate, and the economy, that there is a nexus there, and that at the end of the day, people have lives to lead. Here they've talked about climate positive growth. Paint for us a picture of what this relationship could be, where people begin to see business opportunities, where people begin to see entrepreneurial opportunities within this conversation around climate change. Because you straddle both worlds of the environment and business.
Yes. I think it is very important, and listening to the discussions today from the civil society into the indigenous people, listening to the leader of the government, listening to various speakers that we had today, it comes out very clear that the enemy of Africa is not within Africa. The enemy is without. And how to deal with this is to restructure, first of all, ourselves, to appreciate, Joe, the fact that we need to be united. This is the first thing that is challenging. And it keeps away so many opportunities that are so profound out there. The moment we unite, it is when we realize, oh, the outside community, and I want to thank leaders and governments that have been supportive to the climate change effects agenda in Africa and others. I must salute them. But the fact that we have a 100 billion kitty that has never been started, 2-3 years down the lane since what was discussed in COP21, is a fact that shows that the enemy is not here. The enemy is without. So first and foremost, we need to restructure ourselves as a country, as countries in Africa, so that we stop seeing each other as enemies. Immediately after every political situation, you find that there is a lot of wrangles within. Instead of targeting ourselves to go out there, you can find the coups that have been held in Africa. That is one source of disappointment that leads to blinding our eyes from the opportunities that we have. The challenges that we have can create opportunities for our youth. We are talking of the forest materials that we have. We are talking of the advantage of the land that we have, which, by the way, the indigenous community have said, never call our land idle. We call it idle, we are abusing them because they know it as the father, as their parents used to keep animals there and therefore protected them, and therefore we should never call them idle. We need to include the indigenous community to ask them, what is this that we can be able to do that can bring food on the table? The forest opportunity that we have, what are we doing in ecotourism? What are we doing in ensuring that there is material and opportunities that can be done in renewable energy? What is this that we can do in education? And again, the young people in the conference also say that stop giving us now more of skills. I think we now need jobs that can take us to the next level. These jobs, where are they? how can we identify the corporates that are there in our continent to be able to see the material. The president has talked about the opportunity in renewable energy and particularly electric vehicles, the materials that are available in our continent. Currently, unless we process them, we are only going to harvest or earn $11 billion US. The moment we process this further, the opportunity is $7 trillion US. You can imagine how much more that these are. And there are so many little activities. And more important, you know, I learned a lot today out of this discussion. The youth are saying, we have been doing a lot of research. We have innovations that have been done over the years, but we do not have support from the corporates to be able to support us in this process. What are these innovations the youth are doing? How much transformative are they? We can never just tell the youth this is what we have. And by the way, we are talking of 70% of youth in Africa. Can we, this is the time not even to ask where the opportunities, is to involve them and tell them what have you been doing, what has been keeping you busy, what are the innovations that you have been doing that we can now be able to turn around this. And finally, we have an opportunity that is very, very unique, that Africa has so much potential in many things. The youth, 70%, how are we employing them? The raw materials, we're talking about animals here. What are we doing to further process what we can be able to do? There are various areas that you just wonder, why is it that we are taking things for granted? This is now what we need to wake up and start employing and getting it to the right place.
Mr. Williams, you talked about something that hasn't featured very much in these kinds of conversations, and one gets a sense that every time a meeting like this happens, a new issue comes up. How hopeful are you that somebody will start talking about indigenous production systems for livestock in meetings such as this, and even COP28, which is now just a few months out?
Well, Joe, we remain very hopeful. The fossil fuel discussions has been around for a very long time. So if you look at that as an example, there is obviously a very good reason why we need to continue to think for new ideas. And this area that we are bringing up is actually one of those. Because as I said in my earlier remark, the fact of the matter is that industrial agriculture, especially one that looks at how animal production needs to be done, is not going to solve the problem.
But what is the business opportunity? I know that, as Dr. Green was talking about it, many times people want to see business opportunities, even in times of crisis like this one. One of the reasons why, for example, we are hearing a lot about renewable energy, for instance, as an alternative to fossil fuels, is because there are business opportunities that have been created there. Is there an alternative to factory farming, industrial agriculture as it is, that you can place on the table that can begin to look like an incentive to people who want to invest in this space?
Absolutely. Part of this argument is calling for fairer financing of agriculture. If you, Joe, go to the bank today to secure a loan for agriculture, we are saying that that conversation that will enable you access that loan should include and reflect whether or not your system is going to contribute to climate change. You know? So what we are saying is that governments around the world must take that bold step to say, indeed, when we are financing, we cannot put more money into the farmer that is in Europe and put less money in the hands of the farmer in Africa. That is not fair. That is part of the problem for the last several decades, I may say. So we need to change that. Young people are calling for their involvement, not as bystanders, but they want to be decision makers. They want to be involved in driving the agenda. If a young man goes to the bank today, the conditionalities tied to him accessing that loan is not going to help him to be part of the solution. So all of this may have to change. But all we are saying is that given that 70% of the food we consume, Joe, which is more healthier, which is going to help us to live our lives even better, which is going to enable our environments to become part and parcel of ourselves, I think that that's the solution. Last year, for the first time, the nexus between animal welfare, human welfare, and environmental welfare was hatched. And it was the first time that the UN passed a resolution, 5.2, on that matter. So we are moving. That is part of the hope that we see. The animal welfare discussion, animal protection discussion has not been on the agenda as it is today. But this is a sign that we are all in agreement that, one, we must treat our animals respectfully because they are sentient beings, but we also must look at our production systems because it will be unsustainable given the way our population is growing to think that we can feed the world with that amount of protein from animal sources that we need. We need to rethink our strategy.
Mr. Kioli, ultimately, a lot of Kenyans out there will be asking, what's the big deal about this meeting? What can they expect from it? What is that one thing that a Kenyan sitting somewhere in whatever corner of this country can hope to hear or to see because there was a big meeting like this in Nairobi?
Joe, this is the first time we are getting, as Africa, to emancipate ourselves. This is second emancipation. This is a time that Africa turns around and realizes, yes, we want funding from the north, but yes, we have the potential. This is a time that we want to consolidate our voices. This is a time that you start seeing things differently. You start seeing yourself as a producer, not as a spender, not as a recipient. And this is the outcome that we are looking for, going forward to see Africa changing, to see Kenya taking its role, to see homegrown solutions for Africa in an African way, to see emancipation in terms of finance. If they don't give us the 100 billion they promised, then what? Are you still going to Nesh? Are we going to a pity party? No. Africa must emancipate itself going forward.
What about the financial infrastructure? People have talked a lot about that, you know, even if you look at the terms of financing across the world for various things, not just with regard to climate change, that African countries are getting a raw deal, that something needs to happen globally so that the financial infrastructure is fairer for Africa. Is that a view that you share?
You see, when we were in Sharm el-Sheikh and a proclamation of the loss and damage basket was formed, the strategy, I can tell you for free, Joe, is that this thing may take even 5 years to be crafted, to see the first shilling coming out of the basket. If we change the narrative during this meeting, everybody will go with one voice that we want the loss and damage basket yesterday. Since we know that we have the potential of decarbonizing the world, we have realized that we have the potential. We have realized the North cannot work without us. We have realized we are the producers. We have realized we have 10 terawatts of renewable energy. Nowhere in the world has similar potential. We can conquer the world by saying, look, we need your money, but let's have a sitting so that money can flow, so that we can be in charge of our issues in Africa.
Dr. Green, we are coming to the end of this conversation, and you struck a very hopeful note at the start, and perhaps you would want to finish there. What's the greatest potential you see coming out of this meeting, certainly from that side of the business opportunities that people can think about in this space that also address the climate crisis?
Many opportunities. The fact that even in the opening session that it was presented in the space of renewable energy and e-mobility, the fact that the potential for Africa and the raw materials for batteries, lithium, and other related renewable energy that can power e-mobility, we are currently exporting them in raw materials at about 11 billion US dollars. The fact that we can produce this from within portends more than 7 trillion US dollars. This is a great opportunity. The next millionaires and billionaires are going to come from the agricultural sector. And therefore, the opportunity for us to start thinking of smart agriculture that also deals with issues of climate change, an opportunity that we can use the best technology that there can ever be, putting the best research and employing the best that we can be able to deal with. looking at industries in the best way possible. What is it that the African people are consuming? And we start thinking of producing them locally here. Because Kenya, Africa at large has got most of the raw materials that can ever produce most of the things we are using here. Producing food and processing it here. Producing vehicles and processing them here. Producing many other products, including home use items and clothing. We have a lot of land that can be used to grow cotton. Why is it that countries are coming to set up here under the AGOA arrangements and many other programs for industries that we are producing clothes in Africa, and yet we are the ones who are bringing in imported products, including used material? We have to remove that selflessness from us. We got to change our mindset. As I say, the enemy is without, and the world outside Africa is so organized that if you deal with the little enemy within, then you will attack the world, and the world will be able to give it its best. Currently, we have been made to be fragmented so that people and countries that do not intend to deal with issues of climate change in the way that they are, then they misuse us, and we get to a level that we are not offering livelihood solutions to our people.
Mr. Williams, you have the last word on this because we are really out of time. So 30 seconds of your closing remarks.
Yeah, Joe, I think I would not belabor the point. First of all, it's to be clear that World Animal Protection is not against eating meat. That is not what this is about. What we are saying is that we must think very seriously going into the future what we need to do about our production systems. We don't need to industrialize. We don't need to go the way China and the US have gone, because we have better ways of solving our problems. We signed up, all of us in Africa, to Maputo Declaration, to Malabo Declaration. We have Agenda 2063. Our governments must put money into those systems. Those systems need to be financed. We cannot be pointing finger at the north and thinking that that will bring the solution. For once, let Africa unite and rally behind the call that the President of the Republic of Kenya has put out to everyone, so that our systems can actually serve us than they are doing now.
Dr. Green, 30 seconds. I can see you are
No,
behaving
I
in a
only
manner
want
likely
to
to suggest
congratulate you, Joe, because I have just overheard that you are learning or you are studying to become a doctor in your space. This is the future of Africa. That our knowledge, our technology can be advanced because we have people who are well studied, and we have the power of even importing. We can't have a continent that is exporting people to go and work out there when we have the knowledge. So I want to congratulate you on behalf of Kenyans, Dr. Joe Ageo. Thank you very much, and God bless you, sir.
Coming soon. Thank you very much.
You,
Mr. Kioli, you have 1 minute, I'm told.
Thank you very much.
And please finish so that we can end this.
Yes, I want to say that Africa, and specifically Kenya, 75% is youth. And this is also similar in Africa. We have a huge potential that is untapped. The youth are doing a good job. The challenge now is about innovation and technology transfer. And finally, we want to look for solutions in cooking. 800 people in Africa, million people in Africa, still don't have access to clean energy. This is something that needs technology, innovation going forward. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much. And yes, I have to finish this because the conversation is interesting, but we really just don't have time. So Dr. Isaac Kalua Green, he's an ecopreneur, but also the founder of Green Africa Foundation. We've been speaking to him. Also, Mr. Tennyson Williams, Africa Director of the World Animal Protection. And of course, John Kioli, who is the chairman of Kenya Climate Change Working Group and also a member of the Climate Change Council. My name is Joe Agea. In a short while, NTV Sasa will be on. But for now, we'll take a short break. After that, kazi kwenu wenzetu NTV Sasa. Have a lovely day.
Learn in a Minute, brought to you by Nivea Nourishing Cocoa Body Lotion.
We keep moisturizing our skin, but how do we keep it nourished? It's a well-known fact that your skin is the body's largest organ. How are you supposed to keep it healthy? It all begins with the lotion you choose to apply on your skin. Safari huanzia hapo. Ensure your lotion has the key ingredients that are required to keep your skin deeply nourished, such as vitamin E. I want to save you the journey of searching for a lotion, so I'll let you in on a little secret. Karibia screen. Haya, karibia tena zaidi. Haya, one last time. Very good. Now say it with me. Nivea Nourishing Cocoa Body Lotion. It is enriched with a creamy formula, natural cocoa butter and vitamin E, providing a deep 48 long-lasting moisturized skin. My name is Emma, and this is Learn in a Minute.
Learn in a Minute, brought to you by Nivea Nourishing Cocoa Body Lotion.
With 5-in-1 Complete Care, the deeply nourishing formula prevents your skin from drying with precious cocoa butter and deep moisture for smooth and healthy-looking skin.
Benefits of ordering with Glovo. Glovo allows you to order anything you want at the comfort and convenience of your home. Craving fried chicken or pilau or pizza? Easy and simple. Order on Glovo today. Glovo, order anything, we deliver in minutes. With Glovo, you order anything unataka, and when you get it una celebrate because kukuchoma imefika, na wakati keki inafika ndio sherehe inaanza. Order Glovo, will deliver in minutes.
No matter what happens between now and the end of his career, Luka Modric will always be remembered as one of the greatest midfielders of his time. A Ballon d'Or winner, a key figure as Real Madrid won the Champions League 5 times, Modric will always be feted at the Bernabeu. But now, more than ever, it is clear Modric's time at Madrid is coming to an end.
Shield your families from germs. When Dettol is a part of every household bucket, then you and your family can stay protected from up to 100 illness-causing germs.
Everyday use of Dettol keeps my loved ones protected.
Mama Stevo, where are the kids?
I think they're upstairs doing their revision.
Oh, you guys are here. Maria and Steve, which revision papers are you doing today?
Baba, mimi nashughulikia maswali ya marudio ya somo la Kiswahili kutoka kwa gazeti la Taifa Leo.
Na wewe?
I am working on the mathematics revision paper from the Junior Sport magazine of the Daily Nation.
Wow, this is wonderful. Are the revision papers from Taifa Leo and Daily Nation working for you guys?
Yes, Dad. Wanauliza maswali yao kwa njia nzuri na nyepesi sana.
And the questions are in tandem with our syllabus.
Dear parents, invest in Taifa Leo and Junior Sport for KCPE and KCSE revision papers. Kwa maswali ya gazeti la Taifa Leo, usiukose uhondo huo kila Jumatatu hadi Jumamosi. In our Junior Sport, it's every Monday. Do not miss out.
Benefits of ordering with Glovo. Glovo allows you to order anything you want at the comfort and convenience of your home. Craving fried chicken or pilau or pizza? Easy and simple. Order on Glovo today. Glovo, order anything, we deliver in minutes. With Glovo, you order anything unataka, and when you get it una celebrate because kukuchoma imefika, na wakati keki inafika ndio sherehe inaanza. Order Glovo, will deliver in minutes.
This is NTV.
Mtazamaji, ni siku ya Jumatatu tarehe 4 mwezi Septemba mwaka 2023. Popote pale ulipo, natumai kuwa siku yako inakwenda vyema kabisa. Hujambo na karibu. Kongamano la hali ya anga, mtazamaji, limeng'oa nanga hapa jijini Nairobi. Mtazamaji, bila shaka viongozi mbalimbali wakiwemo viongozi wa mataifa takriban 20 wamehudhuria kongamano hili hapa nchini Kenya, na bila shaka ni jambo nzuri tu kwa taifa na hasa kwa Afrika, kwani kongamano hili ambalo ni la kwanza kabisa katika bara la Afrika, Kenya ikiwa ndio mwenyeji wa kwanza, bila shaka ni swala la kujivunia. Na kongamano hili tayari, mtazamaji, limefunguliwa rasmi na Rais William Ruto. Hivyo basi bila shaka tutakuwa tunaelekea kule katika ukumbi wa KICC ambako wanahabari wenza wako kule, Zainab Wandati, Joe Ageo na vile vile Bernard Mwinzi. Bila shaka tuweze kupata kwa kina zaidi kuhusiana na kongamano hilo. Mie kwa jina ni Nicholas Wambwana, karibisha kwa mikono miwili. Waandamana nami kakitako kuanzia sasa hadi tamati, mtazamaji, ila nikufahamishe kwamba kuna mambo makuu ambayo tunayapa kipaumbele siku ya leo. Nakupa mambo haya katika ukuta huu, mtazamaji. Tuangazie kwanza, hili ni kongamano la hali ya anga, mtazamaji. Sahau mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, weka kongamano la hali ya anga, mtazamaji. Kama nilivyokufahamisha, ni kwamba linaendelea katika ukumbi wa KICC ambako wageni mbalimbali wamehudhuria kongamano hili, mtazamaji. Bila shaka tutakuwa tunaliangazia kwa kina zaidi. Kamati ya usalama, kamati ya bunge inazuru jumba la Nyayo, inatarajiwa kuzuru jumba hili la Nyayo. Kumbuka kwamba ni baada ya waziri wa usalama wa ndani Profesa Kithure Kindiki kuweka wazi kwamba analainisha mambo ya upataji wa pasipoti kutoka jumba hili la Nyayo katika eneo hilo, mtazamaji. Bila shaka atakuwa anachunguza zaidi na kuangalia na kwa namna gani. Kisha mwisho kabisa naangazia swala la DCI ambao anatarajiwa kuhojiwa kuhusiana na swala hili la World Coin, pale ambapo Wakenya walikuwa wakipigwa picha macho basi kwa ajili ya kupata data zao kuhusiana na masuala mbalimbali kisha kupata malipo. Hivyo basi DCI watakuwa wanajibu maswali kuhusiana na iwapo walikuwa wanafahamu swala hili au namna gani. Hizi zote ni taarifa ambazo, mtazamaji, utazidi kuzipata kuanzia mwendo wa saa 7 kwenye NTV ya Dhuhuri, kisha baadaye kwenye NTV jioni mwendo wa saa 1 jioni, mtazamaji. Tuingie rasmi katika swala hili la mabadiliko ya kongamano la hali ya anga, mtazamaji. Ningependa moja kwa moja tuangazie swala hili ambako mwenzetu ambaye ni mhariri wa masuala mazingira Wandati Zainab pamoja na Bernard Mwinzi wako katika ukumbi wa KICC. Ningependa sasa hivi ni wapisho tufahamishe kwa uchache tu ama kwa ufupi bila shaka kuhusiana na swala lenyewe. Zainab na Mwinzi, hebu tufahamisheni matarajio katika kongamano hili na imekuwa namna gani siku ya kwanza ya ufunguzi.
Hujambo Nick, ndio tuko katika ukumbi wa KICC na kikosi kizima cha wanahabari wanaohusiana na masuala ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchi. Tuko hapa, Joageo umesema yuko hapa, Mwinzi huyo hapa, na mimi Helen Aura, Leon Lidigu, Helen Shikanda. Sisi sote tuko hapa kuweza kuwajuza ni nini hasa kinaendelea hapa. Kongamano hili limeanza rasmi leo. Rais William Ruto ameongoza marais wengine angalau 20 hivi akiwemo rais wa nchi ya Ufaransa katika hafla hii, na hafla hii itaendelea kuanzia leo hadi siku ya Jumatano, na hapo mwisho wake tutaweza kupata document ambayo wanaita Nairobi Declaration, ambayo itaweza kuelezea ni nini hasa Afrika wamefikiana nini, na tutakapoenda kwenye COP 28 mjini Dubai, ni nini kama Afrika tutakuwa tunapeleka kule. Na Mwinzi ameenda kujiunga na baadhi ya washiriki wengine ambao walikuwa wanafanya maandamano. Mwinzi, na nini uliona kule kwenye maandamano?
Yes, nimeenda katika uga wa kitaifa wa Nyayo ambapo nimepata watu wengi sana wamekuja kutoka nchi mbalimbali za Afrika, na wanakuja wanasema mabadiliko ya hali ya hewa yamekuwa ni changamoto kwetu sote katika Afrika nzima. Na wanasema kuwa wenye wanaoongoza maraisi na wengine wao wanasema kuwa wanaongea tu lakini hakuna kitu wanafanya, wanahangaika huku chini. Kwa hivyo kulikuwa na maandamano kutoka Nyayo kwenda katika uwanja wa magari, kuegesha magari wa Green Park, ambapo baadaye kutakuwa na ile kitu wanasema concert.
Na hapo tuko na Helen Aura na Leon Lidigu.
Wanasema ni sherehe, lakini sherehe ya kusononeka. Wanasema kwamba hali ya hewa imewahangaisha sana. Na kila mwaka tunakuwa na kongamano kama hizi. Vile umesema tumekuwa na kongamano nyingi sana. Tulikuwa Misri last year. Leo tuko Nairobi. Baadaye tutakuwa Dubai. Lakini baada ya kuongea, nini kingine tutafanya? Itakuwa ni maongezi tu peke yake ama kutakuwa na suluhisho? Tuseme kuwa sisi wa Afrika tunaumia, mahindi hatuna chakula, mito inakauka. Tutafanya nini baada ya maongezi haya? Na ndio maana unasema kwamba mambo ya Nairobi Declaration ambao ndio kila mtu anafuatilia sana, na katika ile mikataba tutakuwa nayo hapa tukipeleka Dubai baadaye, maybe tunasema kwamba wakati huu Afrika itaenda na msimamo mmoja, lugha moja. Hayo ndio mahitaji ya Afrika. Tunasema hiki ndio kikubwa sana kwetu.
Na Nick, kwa katika statement yake Rais William Ruto alisema kuwa ni wakati wa kubadilisha namna ambavyo Afrika inapata fedha za hasara na madhara yanayotokana na mabadiliko ya tabia nchi, na hayo ni mambo ambayo yataweza kujadiliwa hapa, na kufikia siku ya Jumanne tutaweza kujua ni nini hasa wamekubaliana, ni nini hawakukubaliana, na ni nini itabadilika kutoka sasa kwenda hadi COP 28. Na tuko hapa mpaka kuanzia around saa 9 hapo, alafu kesho tena tuko hapa siku nzima. Rais ako tena na hafla nyingine leo adhuhuri ako na hafla nyingine tena ya kuweza kuwapatia Wakenya, kupatia county zile fedha ambazo watakazotumia kujistahimili na madhara ya mabadiliko ya tabia nchini.
Asante sana Zainabu Wandati na Bernard Mwinzi. Bila shaka kama alivyotaja wako katika ukumbi wa KICC ambako kongamano hili linaandaliwa. Mtazamaji, ni kongamano kuanzia siku ya leo nadhani hadi siku ya tarehe 6 na mwezi huu wa Septemba, na kama alivyotaja ni kwamba ni kongamano ambalo limeandaliwa kwa mara ya kwanza barani Afrika hapa nchini Kenya, ikiwa ni hatua ambazo zinapigwa mbele ili Afrika vile vile kuweza kujumuishwa katika swala hili kikamilifu. Wasionekane kwamba wao ni kama kwenye matatu tu wanabebwa kisha wanafika wanashuka, lakini sasa hivi wameamua kwamba basi wawe kwenye kiti cha dereva basi kuendesha mjadala huu, na ndio hatua ambazo zinapigwa siku ya leo. Hiko kongamano hili linafunguliwa rasmi. Viongozi mbalimbali kama nilivyokutajia ni kwamba zaidi ya 20 hivi wamehudhuria kongamano lenyewe hapa jijini Nairobi. Leo ni siku ya Jumatatu na mtazamaji, huwa tunaandaa mdahalo kuhusiana siasa, sera na uongozi. Ndani ya studio nina wageni wangu watatu mtazamaji, ambao bila shaka tunachanganua swala hili kikamilifu tena kwa undani zaidi, lakini tutakuwa tunaingia katika swala hili la mazingira kidogo tuweze kuangalia, manake na sisi pia kama Wakenya tunahusika moja kwa moja mtazamaji. Na ndani ya studio nina upande wangu wa kulia pale mwisho kabisa naye naibu gavana wa Machakos Bwana Francis Mwangangi. Karibu sana mheshimiwa.
Asante.
Na bila shaka vile vile tunaye Timothy Kipchumba ambaye ni mbunge wa Marakwet West, Marakwet Magharibi. Karibu sana mheshimiwa. Vile vile upande wangu wa kulia hapa naye Daktari Naman Rop ambaye ni mheshimiwa mwakilishi wadi wa Soin. Karibu sana mheshimiwa.
Asante.
Bila shaka leo ni siku kubwa kwa taifa la Kenya na kwetu sote na kwa ulimwengu kwa jumla. Tunaangazia swala hili la tabia nchi na tunazungumzia kwamba kumekuwa na mabadiliko ya tabia nchi mara nyingi. Hali ya anga inabadilika kila wakati na kuna mambo mengi ambayo ni ya kuzungumzia. Mambo mengi ambayo tunafaa kuyazungumzia, tumetoka wapi na ni hatua zipi ambazo tunazipiga kuhakikisha kwamba tunakuwa katika njia iliyo sawa. Na hili kongamano ni mojawapo ya masuala haya ambayo tunayazungumzia. Ningependa nianze pale mwisho kabisa nikija upande huu, naibu gavana wa Machakos, na ningependa tulete hili swala karibu sana na nyumbani mheshimiwa. Hapa nazungumzia swala la ukame ambao tumeshuhudia kwa muda mrefu kama taifa, kukanyesha kidogo. Sasa hivi tunaambiwa kwamba tunatarajia mvua ya El Nino. Tukijaribu kuangalia pale ambapo tumetoka na ukipiga tathmini yako, unahisi ni wapi ambapo tumekosea kama taifa? Tuzungumzie Kenya kwanza.
Nafikiri na asante kwa mwaliko.
Karibu.
Nafikiri walioketi hapa ambao wamekuja wenzangu, naweza sema kwa lugha nyingine we are the luckiest, sababu tunazungumzia maneno ya kubadilika kwa hali ya anga na mambo mengi, na ambapo kuna kongamano la continent hili letu la Afrika. Nikirudi kwa swali lako ni kwamba nikiangalia tumekuwa na madhara haya, na kuna jambo moja nafikiri kama nchi hatujafanya vizuri. Nafikiri hii maneno ya kuangalia jinsi watu wamekuwa wengi, wamekuwa wakiongezeka na kufanya mipango ya jinsi ya kuwatunza na kuhakikisha ya kwamba kama nchi maendeleo yetu inaambatana na vile watu wetu wanaendelea kuongezeka. Nafikiri hapo ni jambo ambalo hatujalifanya vizuri. Na ni kwa sababu gani nasema hivyo? ukiangalia watu wameongezeka.